All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at this research article about a pretty heavy topic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's from the Science of the Total Environment Journal, published back in 2022 by Jarity and some others.
Okay.
And it digs into the connection between unsheltered homelessness and, get this, urban water quality.
Wow.
Yeah, and I got to admit, this article really grabbed my attention. It's like a detective story,
Yeah.
where these scientists use all this fancy tech to track down contamination in the water.
I can see that. Like, how do they even begin to approach that?
Well, it's pretty amazing. They focus their research on the Las Vegas watershed.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, you probably know, but that feeds right into Lake Mead.
Right, right. Huge source of drinking water for tons of people.
Exactly, millions, in fact. And you think about Las Vegas, right? Back in 2020, they had over 5,000 people experiencing homelessness,
Wow.
and 2/3 of them were unsheltered.
Oh, wow.
So you start to see how this could really impact the water.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with, almost half the shelter beds just sitting there empty. That's crazy.
It is, and this isn't just happening in Vegas, right?
Nope. Unsheltered homelessness, it's a global issue. Growing fast. In the U.S. alone, we're talking about 226,000 people living in places that weren't meant for people to live in.
Exactly. So this research, trying to understand the environmental and public health impacts of all that, it's pretty important.
Definitely crucial.
So the research team, they use all sorts of techniques,
Yeah.
both traditional and some really advanced stuff.
Okay, like what?
Well, first they looked at the usual stuff, like general water quality and fecal indicator bacteria.
Right, right. Standard measures.
But then they took it a step further. And this is where it gets really cool. They start using these things called trace organic compounds, TRTs for short.
TRCs, okay.
Yeah. They're like chemical fingerprints, You trace them back to specific sources. Things like pharmaceuticals, even illicit drugs and their metabolites.
Yep.
Yeah. And those things, they can stick around in the environment for a while, giving us clues about what people have been up to.
Oh, I see. So like finding a bunch of caffeine or ibuprofen in the water could indicate what? Human waste in the area.
Exactly. And they didn't stop there. They also looked for these microbial markers, like super specific ones that are unique to human waste.
Like what?
Well, there's HF-180. Well, they found some pretty specific stuff. Things like acetaminophen, caffeine, ibuprofen, naproxen, even illicit drugs, and their metabolites. And get this, these were way more common in areas near homeless encampments compared to, like, treated wastewater.
Oh, wow. So it's not just like general human waste. It's the specific stuff that gives you the clues.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of this research. Those details help us understand what's actually happening in those areas.
Wow, that's pretty incredible.
It is, and it gets even more interesting. So remember those microbial markers? Well, guess what? HF-183, crassphage, and PMOV were also way more common in those same washes, like significantly more prevalent.
So another piece of the puzzle falls into place.
Exactly. It's like they're building this undeniable link between unsheltered homelessness and the water. But the question is, what does it all mean? Like, why should we even care about this?
Right. What's the big picture here?
Well, it means that unsheltered homelessness has a real, measurable impact on the environment. And that impact extends to the water we all depend on. Think about it. All that contamination from urban runoff, including the stuff coming from those encampments, it flows right into Lake Mead.
Right. Which, like we said, is a major source of drinking water for millions of people.
Exactly. It really highlights how connected social issues and environmental health really are. You can't separate them.
You're absolutely right. Neglecting one area will always have consequences in another.
Exactly. And if we want to build a truly sustainable and healthy future, we need to understand these links.
No doubt about it.
And this research, it's a big step in the right direction. It shines a light on a problem that's often overlooked.
Absolutely. Bringing this to the forefront is crucial.
And it makes us think about possible solutions.
Exactly. Which, I'm actually really curious to dive into.
Me too. But before we get ahead of ourselves, there's another really interesting part of this research I want to explore. Okay, I'm ready when you are. It's fascinating. The researchers found some really specific patterns in the types of torses they found in different areas. Like, remember how we were talking about those chemical fingerprints?
Yeah.
Well, they noticed some pretty big differences between what they found in the washes near those homeless encampments and what they found in the treated wastewater.
Oh, really? What kind of differences?
Well, the washes near the encampments had way more drugs like heroin and acetylmorphine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they actually detected those specific substances multiple times, but only in those locations.
That seems like a pretty big clue, doesn't it? Like, what does that tell us about the contamination?
Well, it tells us it's probably more of a direct input, like probably coming from people actually using those drugs right there in those areas.
That makes sense.
And it's interesting because they actually found that those commonly prescribed opioids, like, your codeine, your hydrocodone, oxycodone, that stuff was more prevalent in the treated wastewater.
Okay, so a totally different pathway. Yeah, exactly. Different entry points into the water system.
Yeah, it really is about those specific chemicals, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just about finding human waste in general. Those specifics tell you a lot about what's going on.
Totally. And that kind of information, it's gold for figuring out what kinds of interventions and support services are needed. Like, if you know heroin use is really prevalent in certain areas, that could really help shape public health initiatives, things aimed at harm reduction, treatment, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the data's leading you towards solutions, not just showing you the problem.
That's a great way to put it.
So what about those southern washes we were talking about earlier, the ones in Las Vegas?
Oh, yeah.
They showed a totally different pattern, didn't they?
They did. They had really high levels of dissolved solids and some specific torses like sucralose and carbamazepine.
Okay, so a whole different set of fingerprints. What did the researchers think that meant?
Well, they think those washes might be getting impacted by something called septic tank leachate, where it mixes with the shallow groundwater.
Ah, I see.
Basically, it means contamination can come from all kinds of different places. And if you want to find real solutions, you got to understand where it's all coming from.
It really does seem like this is way more complicated than you might think at first. It's like a puzzle with all these different layers.
That's a great analogy.
And you know what else they did? They actually used DNA sequencing.
What? Really?
Yeah, to analyze the microbial communities in the water samples.
Oh, wow. So they were actually looking at the DNA of the bacteria and viruses in the water.
Exactly. And they found some really interesting stuff.
Like what?
Well, certain groups of organisms were way more abundant in those washes near the homeless encampments compared to other spots.
So even more evidence to support their findings.
Exactly. It's like they built this case with multiple lines of evidence. The chemicals, the microbes, all pointing in the same direction. And like we've been saying, this all has a huge impact, not just on the environment, but on social equity, too.
Absolutely. We can't ignore the root causes of homelessness. We can't just treat it as a separate issue from water quality. These things are all connected.
Yeah, you can't just sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
So for you, what were the biggest takeaways from all this? Like, what do you want people listening to really understand?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just how powerful it can be to use all these different approaches to track contamination. They combined chemical analysis, microbial analysis, data on homeless populations. That's how they were able to really show that connection between unsheltered homelessness and water quality.
It's pretty impressive, isn't it? Like piecing together all those different parts of the puzzle.
Totally. And the other thing that really stood out to me is that we need a much more holistic approach to homelessness. You can't just focus on providing shelter. You've got to think about those environmental impacts too. The solutions need to address both sides of the issue, the social and the environmental.
So creating a future that's both sustainable and equitable for everyone.
Exactly. And this research gives us a really strong foundation to build on. Now that we understand those specific sources and types of contamination, we can actually target our interventions better.
This has really been eye-opening for me. I'm so curious to hear what you think about potential solutions. Like, how can we actually use what we've learned to make a real difference?
Well, I'm happy to share my thoughts. I think one of the most promising approaches is, one of the most promising things I've seen is this housing first model.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
It's all about getting people into stable housing as fast as possible.
Right.
And the key is there are no strings attached. They don't have to be sober. They don't have to have a job.
So it's really about recognizing that housing is a basic need, that foundation.
Exactly. And the studies, they actually show it's not just good for reducing homelessness, it actually helps people's health too. And it even takes some of the pressure off of public resources.
Yeah, that makes sense. If someone has a safe and stable place to live, they're less likely to be contributing to all this environmental contamination.
Right, exactly.
And they're also more likely to actually get the support they need for other challenges in their lives.
It's all connected, isn't it?
It really is.
And this research, showing the environmental impacts of all this, it really adds to the argument for investing in solutions like housing first. It's not just about being compassionate. It's about protecting the environment we all share. It's about making sure everyone has a healthy future.
I like that. It's about the big picture.
It is.
And it really highlights that we're all in this together. what we do or don't do, it affects everyone.
That's a powerful way to put it. And I think this whole deep dive, it's been a good reminder of that.
It really has. It's been amazing to see how scientists are using all this technology to understand the connections between social issues and environmental health. And it gives me hope,
Mm.
you know, knowing that we can use this knowledge to push for better solutions, solutions that are more sustainable and more fair for everyone.
I feel that hope too. This research is a call to action, I think. It shows us we have the tools and the knowledge to actually make a difference. The question is, are we going to step up?
That's a great question, and it's one I hope everyone listening will keep thinking about. We've explored the impact of unsheltered homelessness on water quality, but we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to learn, so I encourage everyone to dig deeper, keep learning, and think about how we can all work together to create a world that's both just and sustainable. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.